everybody. You're listening to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Bill Zanowitz.
I'm Steve Morey.
And I'm Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
And we are missing a name there. You did not hear Bryan Pittard. Bryan's taken a week off, and you are not seeing us for a change. We are back to audio for this episode. As I was telling my cohorts, it kind of feels like we're in black and white after being in Technicolor for a few weeks, months at this point. But we're back to our audio roots, and there is no video counterpart for this episode, so we might be in our underwear, and you can't see it. So we have some comic books to talk about. We also have some things that are going on in the streaming services that touch on comic books. So, again, very freeform agenda tonight. I'll throw it over to Steve first. Steve, why don't you tell us about some of those streaming properties that are making the rounds there?
Well, for those of you who had actually joined in for our last podcast, or our listeners to the Southern Fried Geekery podcast, the Old Guard was mentioned, and just this past weekend, the Old Guard dropped on Netflix, and this is an adaptation of a comic book series by Greg Rucka. And essentially it just talks about the movie's a big blockbuster action comic adaptation, the kind that we've been really severely missing, I think, this year, especially this summer, because all the movie theaters have been closed, all the Marvel and DC movies have been bumped. But Netflix did a good job putting this thing out, and apparently it was a huge hit over the weekend. Charlize Theron, obviously, as the main draw with star power, but the supporting cast was excellent too. The action was really well done. There's some faces that you might recognize or be surprised that you recognize, and of course for those of us who are family, there's a really great gay couple in the film itself that have really some wonderful moments as well. And I think that Gina Prince Blythewood, who directed this, I think she's got a good franchise on her hands there. Has anybody else seen this?
I did. I watched it. I also reread the series and over the weekend, and it was just amazing. Charlize Theron is a powerhouse. Whenever she puts her mind to it, she can just about get anything done. I actually think I don't want to say that she got overshadowed, because the intention was to shine a light on somebody new. Kiki Lane, who played Nile, who is arguably the main character of the series. It's because the series is kind of a handoff between literally the old guard to the new guard, right? Mm-hmm. And so Kiki Lane plays the character that she's setting up. She's passing on the legacy to, and she's just so good. She is such an amazing actress, and just put a lot into that role. And you mentioned that the Old Guard was by Greg Rucka. You got to mention Leandro Fernandez in that too, who to me made that book. He's got a very Eduardo Risso style, in my opinion, and I love the film, but after watching the film, I had to go dig out the issues. And I realize I'm a comics fan, right? So this is not a bash to the show, but there's nothing that a film can do that can do anything for Fernandez's art. His art just is captivating in a way that they can never capture on film. So do both. Watch it and read it.
And that was actually my question. And it's a stupid question. It really is, but everybody has to ask it. Which did you prefer? Did you prefer the comic series, or did you prefer the movie in terms of what presented the story, I think, the best way?
The comic. Like I said, it's a great adaptation, but it's a story that was written for comics, and there is something about the visuals that Leandro puts down on the page that does something for the storytelling that you don't get in film. There's a lot of the context and the layering and the backdrop to the story. There's something about, again, turning the page with the pacing of how the story goes that just adds a whole other contextual layer to it. I mean, but also I'm always going to choose the book, right? Like that's just kind of who I am as a person. So, I was talking about it with some other friends and they were like, oh, I'll just go read the book then. There's no reason to watch the film. And that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's a gorgeous film, but I'm always going to choose the comic in that situation, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, Bill, did you see this? Or read the book?
No, I haven't. I saw that Image posted the first issue for free on Comixology, and when I went to buy it, it seems I already had it. So I really haven't read this. For some reason, I thought this was connected to Lazarus, and I don't know why, beyond the writer. I haven't. Just correct. It's not a series. It's a film, right? It's like a little bit over 2-hour film, right?
Oh, yeah,
Right.
yeah. But the series itself, I think there were, 3 issues for the first?
No, it looked like it was 5 and 5.
Is it 5 and 5?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just checked before we talked.
Yeah. So that's
The film that's on Netflix, it is a film. It's feature length, but it does leave leaves off at a cliffhanger. So it sets itself up for a sequel and for the sequel that follows the comics. And I will say they did a really good job following the comic. Like they, with something that didn't have a lot of fanfare, that isn't necessarily like beloved, like they weren't going to piss anybody off by too many people off by straying from the story. They really did a good job by sticking to the roots, including some direct quotes from the writing, which made me happy. That was nice to see.
Steve, you also mentioned there was another film that is not based on a comic book but is superhero related.
Yeah, it's coming up. It'll be released next month, early August. Also with Netflix, called Project Power. They just dropped the new trailer for it earlier this week. Stars Jamie Foxx and J. Gordon-Levitt. Basically, it's I've seen people describe it as Limitless, but with superpowers. So taking the premise that there's a pill out there, a kind of drug that gives a user superpowers for about 5 minutes. As the basic premise. The only problem is nobody knows what power you're actually going to manifest, and I think it's like 1 in 10 might just cause you to explode. So the plot looks pretty interesting. It seems a little bit boilerplate at this point. Jay Gordon-Levitt's the cop. Jamie Foxx, I believe, is a social worker trying to find his daughter who's been taken by one of the drug pushers or manufacturers of this drug because she apparently is the source of the special chemical that provides the superpowers. It looks fantastic, of course. I'm hoping that it doesn't turn into this year's Bright, where it promises a lot, but ultimately the story might be empty. And I think, Bill, you had said, hopefully this isn't what?
Well, yeah, my term was Hancock scared.
Mm-hmm.
Where there is this basis of, look, it's a superhero, and the people who were involved in the creative process for the project really have no appreciation for superheroics.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also very surprised, given the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that apart from mockbusters, that we really haven't had an onslaught of films like that. That gives me hope for how Hollywood views their audience. But
it's hard to create a franchise like that. I think that's the thing. Like, people saw DC attempt to do a Justice League.
No, they made a Justice League
like
film.
Avengers.
It's there.
Well,
Yeah.
They did. But they they didn't do. They tried following the same kind of formula, and it didn't necessarily pan out for them. In a way, even though it's hard to think of a big blockbuster as a huge flop, it really isn't. And of course now people are going to be getting the quote unquote Snyder Cut, which apparently
let's not talk about Snyder Cut, please.
No.
There's no need to, please.
No, but I think other movie studios.
Well, let's talk about Snyder Cut, and I'll just say my final word on it. Okay.
Okay.
I think it's unnecessary, but there's no way I'm not going to watch it. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's
plain
exactly
and simple.
It.
Plain
That's
and
exactly
simple.
it.
Yeah.
They'll put it out there. I'll watch it. But I think a lot of movie studios or a lot of other, interests are looking at attempts to do giant franchise universes, and it's so hard to do. So if you start small, I mean, we've been waiting for Miller programming for a while with Mark Millar stuff, and in the meantime, we've had a lot of other great sort of one-off films, Fast Color, Old Guard, that are either comic book related or superpowers related that just, are surprisingly great or a lot of fun and do really well. But it's hard to really get a good franchise going. I don't know. We'll see. It might be a great one and done.
And there are attempts that are, I think, closely related enough to this. I'm thinking of the plans for the Hasbroverse and whatever Paramount ends up doing with the Atlas properties that they purchase. I have no idea why they looked at that intellectual property bucket and thought, hey, we have a hit.
I mean, and there's been the non-franchise stuff too. I almost forgot to mention Code 8. That was another Netflix film with the Amels with characters with superpowers, created a completely interesting parallel universe where people have had powers for 100 years and are actually second-class citizens. I thought that was a good attempt at creating a relatable one and done or possible franchise.
Thinking of some of the other streaming shows, I have gotten up to the 7th episode of Snowpiercer.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
It's bleak, man. It's not a feel-good show.
No.
And there's some very good actors involved, but I can't say I'm enjoying it. Westworld, I think, is a good comparison, where I'm appreciating the craft, and I've been in for some genuine surprises, but it's not like I'm having a good time while I'm sitting on the couch watching it.
It's so bleak. It's like Battlestar Galactica on Earth in a train without Cylons, where you just can't trust your fellow humans, and just everything is, a one-tipped car away from becoming an extinction event. So it's just, it is bleak.
So
it is.
I'm gonna get through
performance
it,
is great.
But
oh yeah, performances are great
it.
though.
If you're not watching Doom Patrol,
What's
you're
wrong
missing
with you?
something in your life. I mean, it's wonderful. This week's episode was a gut punch. Steve, you haven't gotten to it yet, have you?
No, not yet. But I'm steeling myself.
Just be prepared. The first episode, though, where I didn't break out the tissues, which was a nice break.
Oh, that's good. Abigail Shapiro on that as Dorothy has been fantastic every step of the way.
Stargirl, I'm loving as an Earth 2 geek. I just think the biggest complaint about the show, which I find unimaginable that somebody would make this statement, it's too teenagery. But it's a show with teenagers.
It's a show about teenagers in high school.
This really feels like a Jeff Johns comic come to life.
Mm-hmm.
In the fact that he's better, in terms of DC, he's better than anybody, and we're seeing this with Bendis right now. He's better than anybody of merging Legion lore and Earth 2 stuff and Justice Society in with, stuff from the Batman. He's very good at mixing things together.
Mm-hmm.
And there hasn't been one episode where I haven't had that happy clappy comic geek moment with whether it's just an Easter egg that you caught or something you're actually seeing on screen that has weight to the storyline. Apart from that,
can we get the phrase "happy clappy comic-y" on a T-shirt?
Yeah, why not? Yeah. I think Steve's seen it in person, but it's. I'll do it next week when we video, the happy clappy thing.
Yep.
And in terms of what we have coming up, we do have The Boys second season. We have Umbrella Academy second season. And
I'm excited about that one. I'm more excited about Umbrella Academy than I am most things.
Yeah. And Jupiter Circle actually did finish filming.
Finally, yeah.
So they are in post-production, and that likely will hit before 2020. I will also be interested to see if some of these shows that are slated for streaming might end up on network just because of the paucity of new material that we assume will be in play between September and December.
I mean, that's a very strong possibility. CW's got, the one funny thing about CW is that they've been doing this for the past couple of years. ABC's been doing the same thing, going to Canada, going to the UK, and licensing some of those shows to air during the summer months or during downtime. So, of course, CW's got a full slate of stuff. They don't even have to start filming. They've got plenty of shows to tide them over through the end of the year. No, I think with the amount of stuff that's going on to streaming that's quote-unquote streaming exclusive, we're probably going to see a couple of those things make the leap to standard broadcast, severely edited, but
I kind of had that thought yesterday on one of the Facebook groups. We were talking about the Black Widow film and how it hasn't come out yet, and I still can't believe that Disney Plus hasn't used that as kind of a push right now to get people to sign up for Disney. Like, it would not surprise me a bit if they took and made that into a Disney Plus film and dropped it there, because like you said, states are still starting to shut down. And like you said, with the paucity of content, things that just aren't happening, I kind of wonder if we're not going to see more of that films that are in the can. You don't think so?
I absolutely doubt it, because 62% of most of those big budget comic book films make their numbers internationally. And with the situation overseas far different from where it is here, they're not going to cut off their arm to spite their face.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand a smaller, and I think we've seen it a little bit with these films that probably had a chance of going over the 100 million threshold domestically. I think Trolls was in that, whatever that friggin' Trolls movie was.
World Tour.
Yeah.
Trolls World Tour.
I think Scoob probably benefited from the shutdown, because I don't know. It's a lot different trying to please your kid on a Saturday night with, when they're driving you crazy at home, to actually making the trip to go out to a movie.
Yeah, especially after those opening weekend reviews. I think if that had been a theater release, after the first weekend, it would have just been a drought.
Yeah.
So I think when you do think of movies like Black Widow and Wonder Woman 84, Tenet, even though that's not a comic book film, I think they're just going to hold off until there's a circumstance where a theatrical release makes sense. And if it means that they're pushing it back even more.
Well, while we're talking about that, how about New Mutants, eh?
Yeah, New Mutants I could completely understand.
Drop it. Put it on something. Yeah. Put it on Hulu, put it on Disney Plus.
And they would probably get great numbers.
Oh, yeah.
On Disney Plus.
Yeah.
They probably would get great numbers, though. they had a lot of hopes for Artemis Fowl.
You know what? I watched it and I didn't hate it, but if I had read the books, I probably would have just thrown stuff at my TV. Because that was one of the biggest complaints. It's like, how could you do this to these books that I loved? This is terrible. But yeah, I mean, I miss being able to go and see a massive blockbuster. I mean, this is peak season for big comic book movies. That stretch from Memorial Day through Labor Day, you always get a lot of big movies. Ghostbusters was going to be out, all these other things, until sort of like the gap before Thanksgiving, and then usually there's a big Marvel movie dropping in November, early December. But well, there's always next year.
Interesting though, when you say there's always next year, since this is, I would say, like a third level con, but East Coast Comic Con announced that they're canceling 2020 and the 2021 conventions. I'm not sure if anybody saw that. And there's explanations beyond that, because there's 9 months of planning, and I think even going into 2021, where you do get the smaller cons that are really dependent upon who they sign for autograph sessions and things like that. I imagine there's still going to be a lot of celebrities that are going to be gun shy going into next summer.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. I imagine New York Comic Con will make an announcement on July 31st or August 1st. I am pretty sure they're holding off on that for insurance purposes. So we're not going to have any kind of conventions, I think, this year. Steve, tell us about something that you're reading that you're digging.
Well, something that did come out, I think it was 2018 when the original series came out. It was a 4-issue miniseries by Mariko Tamaki or Mariko Tamaki. Oh, it was only 3 issues.
Yeah, because I loved it.
Ah, yeah. So Mariko Tamaki and Joelle Jones. Mariko Tamaki, who I've talked about already. I think maybe at least twice this summer so far, because she put out the fantastic Harley Quinn Breaking Glass original graphic novel, and also one of my favorites so far this year, Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me. It's just some great literature from Mariko. And Joelle Jones, I mean, if you've seen her art in Catwoman, if you've seen her book Lady Killer, I mean, she has a gorgeous control of the female form as well as the male form. I think she has just a really great aesthetic and a wonderful eye on her, and just a lot of line control. It's beautiful, beautiful work. And actually, one of my favorite depictions of Supergirl in this book, just without costume, and I'll explain why in a couple seconds. But just did a really amazing job on this. So recently, with DC Inc. and DC Zoom being rolled into just DC Trades for YA, they have re-released the collected Supergirl Being Super into a new, into a new trade dress. It's the same format, size, everything fit in with the YA books. It's beautiful. It's very well bound. Feels expensive, or at least feels good quality. But I think this is actually a perfect way to enjoy this book. And to get into the meat and potatoes of the plot, basically it's a retelling, more or less, of Kara Danvers / Kara Zor-El / Supergirl's origins in Midvale. It's not necessarily keeping with any of the other depictions right now. There's been a lot of changes specifically for this book, but I think it's a really great Elseworlds Year One type style story where she's just a regular high school student with her 2 best friends, Dolly and Jen, just sort of living life in a very rural town where there's not much to do and differences stand out. A horrible tragedy, an earthquake, strikes the city and really hits her very close to home. And a lot of the book is her working through her grief, working through sort of what it's like being a teenager in extreme circumstances, but very relatable circumstances for the most part, except for the fact that she does have superpowers. And her parents are very conservative farmers. Her father especially doesn't want her revealing her powers to anyone outside the family.
Also, her father can get it.
Oh, God, yeah. Oh, like I said, Joelle Jones, she has a perfect command of the female form. She knows how to build the male form here. And there's stuff in there if you like the twinkier type of boy, or BOI, or if you like the big old daddy bears, she can do both, and she's got both in this book. But throughout the rest of the book, as she tries to figure out where her life is going to go, what her dreams mean. Are these memories that are coming forward? Are these nightmares that she's having? How are the issues that are affecting her powers lately related somehow to the earthquake and to the tragic death in her close circle? And throughout that, she does grow quite a bit. And it doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel forced. I think a lot of her actions and her thoughts, a lot of this is narrated in her head, which is wonderful. And I think Mariko Tamaki really gets inside the head of a teenage girl here. And I think she does an amazing job. And even if you aren't a teenage girl, you really feel Supergirl's thoughts and her fears and her struggles internal struggles. There aren't a lot of characters in this book. This is actually a really well told, very tight story with very few main characters. You do encounter another Kryptonian, Tan-On, who is a Kryptonian ambassador sent to Earth, presumably before Krypton explodes. You also have Coach Stone, who is the three girls' track and field coach, who's very important to their lives and, is interesting influence, maybe hiding something a little bit more sinister. We're not really sure, obviously. But I think it's just an excellent book that really speaks to somebody who's at that cusp of maturity and understanding that there's more out there than in the small town, but then also that destiny really does play a role if you so choose it. And I think I think between Tamaki and Jones' work on this book, it just makes a very tight, very beautiful story. With a great ending. I think that last page is a lot of fun. In its simplicity, it's just really cool to see. And I think, Bill, I don't know if you remember that last page, but it's just, just one quick sentence and meeting between two very important titans of the DC universe.
Mm-hmm. I really liked the series when it came out. I think with Mariko in particular, coming from a very mixed background of Canadian, Japanese, and Jewish, you get the sense of outsider feeling in a number of characters. And it seems to me that she was the type of individual that really listened to people in high school. And it's funny because we had just talked about Stargirl before, and there's certain kinds of teen dialogue, okay? There's Dawson's Creek teen dialogue, which is what teenagers think they sound like, okay? There's Stargirl dialogue, which is what 40-year-old men think teenagers sound like. And then there's this dialogue where it's someone who cataloged, whether they intentionally performed a catalogization, I don't know what the word is, a cataloging of things that they heard or things that meant something to them that somebody said to them at crucial points where they were growing up. I really loved how full the supporting cast was and wasn't restricted to DC lore.
No.
And plus, I feel of all the characters in the DC universe, and this has been a problem with the character for many periods, that Supergirl should be one of the more optimistic characters. She's Superman without the burden of being Superman. But I always feel it's a character that is somebody that should remain optimistic, and that hasn't necessarily been the portrayal, particularly in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And it was nice to see that, but also that optimism coupled with a lot of realism. And she makes mistakes, and she makes big mistakes. And that's something we all do growing up. And I really kind of wish I first read this in that format instead of the regular size floppy quasi-prestige books that had come out. I love that they put this as part of their program because it fits beautifully into the mix. So.
Yeah. So, Bill, what you said about Mariko being the type of person who would listen to other people in high school, that, the minute you said that, I thought about the work that she did on This One Summer, because so much of the context of that story is the characters just going to, to this little C-store, down by the corner, a gas station, and they're just going to, it's kids and they're going to buy things, but they're not necessarily eavesdropping, but they're overhearing the conversations between these two teenagers, which if you've read the book, you know what happens. If not, I don't want to spoil too much, but these teenagers are having a very, very large and serious life moment that they're trying to find their way through, and the context of that is given just through the little ears of the children who are learning a lot by listening to these things, a lot about themselves and a lot about life and a lot about the future. And so that just that really resonated. She really is one of the best people in comics today who who writes about listening. Which is, she's a very empathetic person. I think, like you said, she's an outsider in a lot of ways, and she's had to be. I wanted to also jump in talking about Supergirl being, just a force of positivity and somebody who is just kind of optimistic, and how that's missing in the last 10 years in the comics. I kind of got a little bit of that in the television show, at least the first season. She wasn't annoyingly optimistic like, say, somebody like Kimmy Schmidt would be, but
Kimmy Schmidt is Supergirl.
That would be a bridge too far. But she was this force of optimism, and it was done in a way that it was, they were really funneling the empowerment. They were really funneling the girl power thing, but she was still happy. She was still, she was struggling to climb a ladder, but she was energized by the struggle. And that was very resonating with me. And I do think that was missing out of, I recently went back and read the Peter David Gary Frank stuff. And I think maybe that was missing a little bit of that. And maybe, and I don't think I realized it until you said it, that was the puzzle piece that was missing. But now that you said it, it's kind of glaring. I'm like, oh yeah.
But also, they had the complication of Matrix into Supergirl,
right.
where didn't really gel till the very end. I also think, and this is something that I think is inherent in the character, if the crest of the House of L is Hope, she had more time as an L than Kal ever did. And she would have embodied those traits more intrinsically. And I was not expecting to talk about Supergirl as much as we are right now.
Yes.
I'm going to throw it over to Caleb. Caleb, tell us about something you're digging.
Well, this is your fault, and it's because of you. So I want to say 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we were having a conversation, and I forget what the topic was, but you were just saying how it's one of the cool things about like us as a group is that we can go read something that's brand new and timely and topical and really dig into it, or we can go read something from, the 1940s or 50s or 60s and still appreciate it just as much. And we don't, and that resonated with me. And it reminded me that I think 2 years ago, I bought a collection of the hardcover Marvel, the Masterworks series for the Submariner. I'm a huge Namor fan. I love him. I love his history, and I haven't cracked those open yet. So sitting here looking at them, and I decided to go back, and I was like, I'll start at the first one, and I'll pick it up and read it. And I've been having a blast. I've been having so much fun revisiting this, especially the first couple issues you get, the first one in there is the first appearance of the Submariner, Marvel Comics #1 out of 1939, and it's incredible. It'll give you goosebumps. The second story in the book is the Mortal Kombat with Submariner, and that's out of Daredevil #7. But then it goes into the Tales to Astonish. Now, I came to love Namor because of my love of the Hulk. I started collecting the Tales to Astonish books. Whenever I can find them and pick them up at a decent price, I'll grab them. And I just really, the visage aside, there's a lot more than just his physical appearance to fall in love with, but he ain't bad to look at either, most of the time. And so as I've been reading this, I've been revisiting the series out of Tales to Astonish, particularly number 70 through about number 76, I think. And essentially what happens in this story is Namor gets back from New York. He had been to New York. He actually went, and it was in that Daredevil '7 issue, he went to hire Matt Murdock because he wanted to sue mankind, everybody, all of humanity, because they were on land and the Atlanteans worked. It didn't work out so well, so he went back to Atlantis. When he gets back to Atlantis, he realizes that his warlord Krang has usurped him. He's stolen the throne. He's taken Atlantis away from him because Krang he's a little pissed that Namor isn't on the ball with invading the surface world. So he's going to push him out of the way, subject the citizens, raise an army, and they're going to go take the land back. The Avengers would have stopped him, but we don't get that far because it doesn't happen. Namor is a character that when he's juxtaposed with people on land, he's kind of an asshole. But when these stories are focused on Atlantis and the Atlanteans, you really get to see how he is absolutely a hero. He's just always a hero who's out of place. In this particular story, it takes place over, like I said, 6 issues. He's usurped. He's getting down there. Like his lady has been taken away from him, and she betrays him in a lot of ways. And he's got to figure out a way to get his throne back from Krang. He's ousted. He's sent out alone. They try to kill him, which that doesn't work so well because he's freaking Namor, and you can't. But he gets, like, when Stan Lee is writing this, right? And so what he does is he takes kind of the trials of Hercules and he condenses them into an undersea adventure where Namor has to essentially chase Neptune's ghost around, and he's got to do these trials and he's got to go through these tribulations to find Neptune's trident, this kind of gold and jeweled encrusted symbol of the true submariner, the true leader of Atlantis. And I mean, these are adventures that he's ill-equipped because he doesn't think of himself as a king yet, which is really interesting because in the Namor that we see today, he's absolutely a monarch. He's a leader. He, in a lot of ways, him and Doom have a lot in common in that they're both kind of Iron Fist type people. But in this, he's not there yet. He doesn't have the mental fortitude that he needs to be a leader. And this is part of him getting that. So he goes and he's chasing basically, like I said, Neptune's ghost through all over the undersea world. And Neptune's ghost leads him into these places where there's a series of essentially traps. In the first one, he kind of comes face to face with the Kraken, this large squid creature. And, Namor's strength is insane. It's incredible. He's off the charts. But this Kraken is treating him like a toy, and it's unseated him. He has to use his brain. And he looks down and he sees a shell. He's got to use what's around him. So he goes and picks up the shell. Interestingly enough, there's a symbol of a trident on the shell. So cool little Easter egg of things to come. And he uses the shell. He uses this aspect of the sea to overcome the Kraken. He throws it like a boomerang, which, water physics, you kind of have to let that go. And it cuts off one of his tentacles. As he's kind of recovering from that, he's going along and he meets an old man. And this old man he's an Atlantean, but he's been cast aside. He's too old really to be of use or of service. He never felt like he had any value, so he was put out. But he starts to kind of counsel Namor, and he becomes almost like a vizier to Namor. And they talk through some things. And Namor kind of gets ahead of himself. He tries to go face Krang, and he loses. He's not ready yet. Krang and his forces kind of scoop him aside. He goes back out to the sea wilderness, and he comes along and he kind of finds this muck monster. And as you're looking at the design, it's you're thinking, okay, early man thing, early the heap, but it's made of seaweed, and he has to figure out how to beat this thing because he doesn't know how you don't know how the anatomy works. He's very confused. So what he does is he has to use the water, and he creates a whirlwind under the water, creates a whirlpool, that he manages to subdue this seaweedy type creature, and he finds basically a trap door under him. This leads him to a series of caves. It goes on through the entire adventure. Krang basically imprisons Namor's lady, which really pisses off Namor. He gets fish mail. The fish telepathically let him know what's happening. And as he goes on, he inevitably just at the last moment, it's these series of you think he's going to lose and then he doesn't, and he pulls it off, which it's really cool. It's 60s comics. It's the birth of in that aspect. It's the birth of these Marvel-esque type superheroes. This is Stan Lee. And all this is like 65, 66. This is Stan Lee just playing with plots, playing to see what he can do. Really trying to shape the world that would become Marvel. And so I had fun with it. I absolutely loved it. Eventually, exactly what you think is going to happen. He gets back. He chases Krang off. He actually shows some mercy. He doesn't kill Krang. He banishes him. And Krang, as he walks off in the distance, is already plotting to come back with more forces to figure something out. He takes this man that he made a vizier, and he makes him a lord. Like, the guy goes from pauper to prince, essentially, and he puts him at the right hand of a king. He marries his lady. There's some happiness there at the end of the story. And then right at the end of the story, there's an earthquake, and it doesn't say it, but I think what it's alluding to is it doesn't tell you what time this takes place in, but I'm pretty sure it was the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Because there's mentioning of atomic bombs and how that these earthquakes had happened before, and the atomic bombs were the result of testing, and this must be in use. So I'm pretty sure that they're trying to set this story at the end of World War II, which was a very interesting context to read into the story after it's over with. Just fun times. The interesting thing about this is the story was drawn. It's attributed to an artist named Adam Austin. Are either of you guys familiar with Adam Austin?
Yep.
So there's something really cool about Adam Austin. He doesn't exist. He's not real. Adam Austin was actually a pen name for Gene Colan, which, shout out to Clifford Meth, who was on the show 3 weeks ago now, 4 weeks ago. I forget because COVID time, everything, or, it might as well have been 7 years ago. But, shout out to Cliff Meth, who's helped the Colan estate and everything. I actually went on Cliff's blog and read some of his writings about Gene Colan and using the Adam Austin pen name. So if you're not familiar with that history, go read some of Cliff's work on it, because it really is kind of fascinating. It's great. And the reason I went back and looked at this is because these issues were inked by Vince Colletta. Now, like Bill said earlier, I don't like to poo-poo on people. The man did a job. He's not a good inker. I really, if I ever become a big boy lawyer, I kind of want to go back and sue whoever let Colletta ink over Colan, because there should be some type of legal ramification for that, because it's not good. So you look at it now, and it is very dated. The lines aren't like, you can see some of Colan's work there, but Colletta just kind of washed it all out. He didn't do a lot with it. There's not a lot in Coletta's inks to appreciate, but the energy of the story, what little of Gene Colan you can see there in the anatomy of Namor, in the anatomy of the creatures that he uses, the landscape of the sea, you can still get a lot of appreciation out of this. And I did. I kept reading it, and I love it. And eventually I'm going to get out of the Colettas, the Colletta era, and move on to some other great stuff. But that's the only knock I have against it. It's one line of Colletta is too much Colletta. So, and I know I'm not alone with that. But hey, Coletta's got fans too, and I can see how people can appreciate them. So to each their own. It's just not for me. But if you ever want to see where Namor comes from, if you're ever reading modern Namor, and you see him being thrown up against the Black Panther, and it's the fight of the kings, and you're wondering how he became this really cold person, how this really staunch personality. Go back and read these early works out of the 60s, because they really do plant the seed, and you see the genetics of this hero. And he is a hero. He's just not always on our side as people, as land walkers. And I think good writers who write Namor the right way understand that and appreciate that. So I loved it. And I know the Masterworks series are kind of pricey. I think they're like $50 a piece. I bought mine secondhand for a fraction of that price. So, search eBay, search whatever, or make a friend who wants to unload, and you can get them. And they look great on the shelf. So check them out.
Okay, a couple things I wanted to address there. The pseudonym was principally because Gene at the time was still under contract to DC's romance line.
Mm-hmm.
And so, though it happened all the time, he wasn't the only one who used pseudonyms at the time. And eventually it does get credited to Colan. as the run goes on. But in those early issues, I think the principal reason was because he was still under contract for Romance Comics for DC, and that's why the pseudonym was used. In terms of Vinnie Colletta, Colletta was one of the fastest inkers around, and when you're erasing Kirby backgrounds, yeah, it's probably not too hard to do that. But there were points where he was inking 8 books a month. Must have made a pretty penny because he had a house in Saddle River, New Jersey, and Saddle River is a pretty upscale area. The county I grew up in, Bergen County, as you go lower in the county, your annual income goes lower. It's that kind of thing. So Saddle River was towards the top. I'd have to take a look again, but there are some Colletta stories where he may not necessarily have been under the deadlines. One that comes to mind is a Doctor Doom solo story from Marvel Superheroes number 20. There are points where he's not turning in a workmanlike job, but for the most part he is. Kirby's strong enough to kind of shine through regardless in a lot of contexts. The one that's really apparent, though, is if you see him inking some of George Perez's early work.
Yeah.
George Perez is not an artist I would ever characterize as boring, and these pages are boring.
He erases so much of George's stuff there, and it makes sense, like what you're saying about him doing 8 issues or whatever. You can knock those out and make the money when you're not worried about consistency in your line or quality on your page. And that's not necessarily me just being, wanting to bash the guy. Like the faces in these stories are inconsistent. The texture is inconsistent. You can tell where he maybe had 15 extra minutes in one day and he just didn't give a shit the next day. It was a job for him. And I think he probably thought of it as a job. He's just like, okay, this isn't my art. They're paying me per page. I'm going to make my money. Which from an economic standpoint, I get, but from an art value standpoint, it just kind of breaks my heart. He did some very similar stuff, I think, to Wally Wood. And if you can make Wally Wood, like you said, if you can make George Perez look boring and you can make Wally Wood's work not sexy, then you're working in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Also, number 77 of Tales to Astonish, I think, is where Colin actually uses his real name for the first time.
I think from the time period, by that point, he would have been free of DC.
Yeah.
I'm also looking at some of these pages because I don't have these in Masterworks, but I have it in, something we also talked about before we were recording. For people who don't think that there were long storylines in comics, go to Submariner in this run, because though there are some done-in-one elements, there also are some threads that go on over 2 years, particularly with the upheavals in Atlantis and some of the later characters that come into the mix, like Atuma and Byra. I've never known how you pronounce Byra's name. It's one of Namor's cousins. There are threads that continue issue to issue to issue to issue, and it's not all like Lady Dorma, with her hand over her head fainting.
Right.
There are some substantive political elements that there is a through line for an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, especially with oceanic eco terrorism and global warming, because essentially, like, he was fighting that battle back then even, and in a lot of ways, I don't know what was in Stan Lee's head, but like what Stan Lee was writing back then has a solid home in the news cycle of 2020. In a lot of ways, it's kind of, to use a pun, and it's uncanny the way that he does it. Have you ever read Bill Everett's Submariner story from Marvel Comics #1?
Oh yeah.
So, after talking about Colletta and after talking about Colin, jumping back to just that, to the work that Bill Everett did, there is so much of that work that I see stylistically in like underground comics of today, that is, I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh man, like I would pick this up today and I would think this is awesome. Like I would think this is new and creative and cool, and the designs are, right at home with something that you might see in Emil Ferris's favorite thing is Monsters, or something that Max Fomera did. So if you've never read that, you've got to go check that out.
Yeah. I also think going the other direction um, of the early Marvel stuff, Namor was much more in tune with comic strips for at
Hmm.
least the first 3 or 4 stories. The publication history of Namor actually started before Marvel Comics #1. The exact same story was printed in a book called Motion Pictures Funny Weekly #1, which was discovered in the 70s, and it's a kind of amazing story about that. The first time I read that story was when they reprinted it in the Invaders in the 70s. Even at, what was I, like 10 years old then? It did strike me as something different than the other Golden Age stories that I had seen reprints of.
Yeah.
A lot of Marvel is crude in the early 40s.
Right.
I mean, look at the first Human Torch story, and I probably could have drawn that.
You mean where he was a bubble with lines?
Yeah, I probably could have drawn that. So I think that kind of shook me because every Golden Age story I'd seen up to that point from Marvel was really, the art was crude.
Yeah.
Namor got crude after a while, but at least the first 3 or 4 stories is a very different aesthetic, and it's worth people tracking down. Just trying to think if there's anything else I want to talk about Namor. Wasn't expecting to talk so much about Namor or Supergirl, but when I get to my comic, it's a brand new character, so we can't talk about it for volumes. And I think I'll do that right now. So the book that I want to talk about is the new Image series Adventureman, written by Matt Fraction with art by Terry and Rachel Dodson.
Mm.
It is a story within a story. At least the first issue is, and as we go on, it kind of abandons that practice, but I have a feeling we're going to see a bit more of that. And we are introduced to Adventureman and his steampunk meets golden age comic book team, and they fight bad guys to save the world. But then we actually find that the storyline that we're reading in the first issue is a mother sharing a story with her son from an old pulp magazine, book in this case. And we find that the main character, as we see so far, is Claire. She's a former policeman. She is dealing with hearing loss. We haven't gotten deep into the story to find how those incidents affect her right now, but she's part of a large blended family of with 6 other sisters of many different races. Her mother unfortunately passed away, but her father's still alive, and the mother was the only person in the family that stuck to her Jewish roots and demanded that if you were in the city, you celebrated Shabbat on Friday nights. So we're treated to the first time we see this family, no one's Jewish, but they're having a Friday Sabbath. And I think that kind of quirkiness is what really drew me in. This instantly became my favorite book that's out there right now. I got the first issue in my slightly delayed DCBS Trials and Tribulations, and thankfully because we are on Image's list, I was able to read the second issue today as well. And this is the most fun I think Fraction has had in a long time. Yeah, Jimmy Olsen is really out there, but this is something different. I think in this book, you really see Fraction's writing shining. The quips are just the right amount of self-aware. Let me tell a little bit more about the story. Again, I've given you the framework about the background of these 1940 stories involving Adventureman. So as we go through the storyline, we see that there are still these mysteries that are hanging over this collection of pulp stories that Claire's been reading to her son. And again, Claire is also the owner of a bookshop, so she has a particular connection to that particular world. Somebody comes into her shop and is immediately kidnapped. This mysterious woman is kidnapped by effectively these weird shadow bug creatures, not things that you normally would see every day. And when we get to the second issue, she finds in the story that there was a particular address that was associated with the publishing company. And that published the Adventureman story, she goes over to the address and things are not normal. She's seeing a skyscraper where no one else is seeing it, and as she enters, that's where the adventure really begins. Has anyone else read these books, Adventureman 1 and 2?
Absolutely.
And what did you think of it?
Oh, yeah. I fell in love. Number one, I fell in love on page one because I'm a huge fan of Terry and Rachel Dodson. Like ever since I read one for the first time, I was kind of a fan. And it looks amazing. Like you can just tell they have fun with what they're doing, and the backgrounds, the little nuances. You know, spend time looking at the backgrounds because there's so much in there. There's so much layered in that city. I could not agree more that this is one of the best things that Fraction has done in a very, very long time. Like it actually feels, you know, Jimmy Olsen is great. I'm reading Jimmy Olsen. I think it's fun. It's it's refreshing. It's a very, in a lot of ways, it's a very good palate cleanser for what DC has done in some other areas. But that is nothing compared to what he's doing with this. He's diving deep into the pulp history of it.
Mm-hmm. And again,
of literature.
Yeah, and though we had the pulp conversation off screen, a book that I had referred to, Caleb, the Doc Savage's Apocalyptic Life, is a huge influence on this book, which is confirmed in the back matter. And the back matter was also really interesting, talking about what he was trying to do is tell pulp stories, but not have them mired in the sexism and the colonialism because of the time that they occurred. And also, and I give this both to Fraction, but also to the Dodsons. When you do have the move from what we assume at this point is the late 1930s, early 1940s, to the current day, they don't employ a drastically different art style. It's not jarring. It's a continual narrative in the visual. And it makes you feel like, well, yeah, maybe we can see the modern day through some Art Deco eyes. And the art is fantastic. I love Claire as a character. I love the things that are slowly being revealed about her. Just that moment where she takes the coffee from the cop when she's on the bike was amazing. And this, like I said, this has instantly become my favorite comic book on the stands. Instantly. From two issues. And I think there's a genuine excitement on the part of Fraction. It feels like he was excited to write this book. And
well, he's been working on this for
been a
years.
while, yeah.
I mean, he and the Dodsons, I think, were first sketching out ideas back in like 2015. I know they've talked about it at Heroes Con, you know, for a couple of years, you know, several years ago. But I'm just, it's really interesting because I've had this feeling about Matt Fraction and his work, or maybe lack of work over the past couple of years, that he kind of took a step back a little bit, because he was sort of churning out a lot of stuff at Marvel, especially, you know, maybe about 7-8 years ago. And of course with Image and everything. But he hasn't felt like he's been really excited about stuff. Now, I did feel the same way about Jimmy Olsen. I think it's definitely a book that Matt Fraction could write. And, you know, I don't really see anybody else right now putting out a 12-issue maxi series about Jimmy Olsen who isn't Matt Fraction. I think doing an amazing job sort of taking a lot of the crazy Silver Age kind of shenanigans and retranslating them. But, you know, this is really interesting. I have not read either of the issues that have been released. I know they're actually reprinting it because it did very well. And it sounds like, you know, the reason being is that it's, you know, a return to form for Fraction. I mean, the Dodsons are always amazing. But, you know, it sounds like this is really connecting with a lot of people, a lot of readers. So that's definitely a good thing. It's good to hear.
And I think with Marvel, you know, he ended on a whimper.
Yeah.
You know, Hawkeye was very strong, but the back-to-back Fantastic Four and FF are not his best work, particularly Fantastic Four.
And see, I loved FF, but you could feel him getting frustrated or or bored even, frustrated or bored with what was going on. Like his Defenders was fantastic, and FF was a lot of fun. It was funny. It was great.
It was a great team. The conception of the team was great. His End of Thor just kind of petered out. The independent stuff, I mean, I thought Sex Criminals got off to a great start, but the delays didn't help. And there were many times where I actually had to reread the entire previous issue to just get some kind of framework of where we were with the next issue. And then at some point, I just washed my hands of it.
Well, speaking of Sex Criminals, they are finally ending it, and they're ending it by doing like a flash forward to the future, so that it's, if you haven't really been reading it, or even if you have been reading it this whole time through all the delays and whatnot, it puts you in a completely new time frame and a new setting to understand where these characters are going to end up. So, it sounds, or it feels like in the past year he's getting back into it, that he's starting to find that joy, that excitement, that kind of intellectual style that he has, that also has a lot of fun, a lot of winks to it, that makes me want to pick up another Matt Fraction book again.
And there's also go ahead, Caleb, please.
I was just going to say, I think part of that is because his kids are older now. So, and I think, and I'm saying that for a very specific reason. If you're reading this book, part of what makes it amazing and part of the magic behind it is, gender aside, this is about a parent trying to pass on the things that they loved and the things that they grew up with to their child in a very noisy world that they want to unplug from. Like that is a key element of this story. If you follow
and also
Matt,
that's interesting what you said, because she does have the hearing loss. She can do it any time.
Exactly, but she has to choose
on.
to.
Yeah.
And she has to deal with the repercussions of unplugging. But if you follow Matt and Kelly Sue online, they dote on, like, they love their children. And it's not like, all parents, most parents love their children to a point. They love their children. They like hanging out. They like seeing their children discover the world. They love that their children are steeped in pop culture and music and artistic influence, and they're weird, quirky, outgoing, energetic children. And you see how much they love that if you follow them online. And I think that's a lot of the reason that both Kelly Sue and Matt both, in a lot of ways, step back from mainstream comics. They put a lot of energy into, and they have a production company. I think they write for film. I forget off the top of my head what that's called, but they focused on that a little bit because it let them be kind of 9 to 5-ish, a little bit more than most freelancers get to be, and focus on their kids. And they moved to Portland, I want to say it is, and they've got a gorgeous home. And again, all of this is public knowledge. It's on their Instagram pages. But now that their kids are reaching preteen stage, and their kids they're kind of at that level where they're people. I think Matt's channeling a lot of that, and what's it like to see. So, what we're talking about, the pulp world, something that we consider in 2020 to be a thing of the past that's still really cool, but it's a thing of the past. What's it like to see that passed on to another generation who finds it enticing, but they see it through a modern lens? And the same can be true of Batman. The same can be true of early the Namor stuff that I'm talking about. I think he's really channeling a lot of that energy, and he's doing it in a way that, unlike when he works with Marvel or with DC, he doesn't have to go through the editorial process of a broad and shared universe. He can just do that. And it is really refreshing. It's good to see him tap into that again, in a way that he hasn't done. And I don't necessarily think it's that he hasn't been able to. It's just that he's put his energies and his focus and his life in other places, in the past several years, and he needed to. And of course, we love comics, and we lament the fact that we weren't getting the quality that he put out in things like Hawkeye for a little bit. But hey, that's part of the price you pay for dealing with humans who have real day-to-day life. And
how dare he?
one of my favorite moments in this book is, and it's in the first issue, and you're in the Adventureman world, and you're seeing this very, very Bruce Wayne-esque analog of mansions, and there's not necessarily a cave, but it's the Bat Cave, and there's a dinosaur, and then it zooms out to the modern day, and it's all the toys that this kid has on his floor in his room. That was awesome.
More Doc Savage than anything else,
Yeah,
in terms of the team makeup and the penthouse life as her hero. And also, I think, from what I understand, they've had a lot of close calls with TV shows almost getting greenlit and things like that. So good. And Steve, is it a case where you've gotten the issues but haven't read them yet, or you haven't got nothing?
Haven't picked them up yet, and it wasn't so much purposeful omission. I think it was one of those situations where I had seen the solicit, didn't pick up the first one, and just felt weird getting the second one, so I bypassed it on the shelf. But now that it is getting a second printing, I'll be able to pick up issue number 1, because obviously it had sold out everywhere. I'll be able to go back and read it from the beginning, because I hate starting in the middle.
All right, well, we are looking at East Coast time, and it's showing that we are past the 11 o'clock mark, and that means some of us have to start the going-to-bed process. So if that means we are leading into the final segment of the show, that's what it means. And on our show, the final segment is the Woofs of the Week segment. In the bear community, if you find a fellow attractive, you woof at them. We've adapted that concept to things that we like. And for you, fair listener, we may be suggesting something that is not a comic book. It may be a film or a TV program or a charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you may be interested in sampling. I'm going to start with you, Steve. Tell us what your woof of the week is.
Well, my woof of the week, I do want to talk about it as one of my main comics, because I've already spent a lot of time talking about a graphic novel representation of a woman going through the process of being pregnant and having a child. And that was the wonderful Lucy Knisley's, or Knisley, however you pronounce it, Kid Gloves, that came out earlier this year. That was a wonderful book. And in the book, she actually talked about some other influences on her and some other things that she read and other people she had spoken to. And one of those was A.K. Summers, who wrote this wonderful book, actually started out as webcomics, called Pregnant Butch. 9 long months spent in drag. And it's a just exceedingly funny and very, very direct telling of A.K. Summers, sort of a semi-fictionalized autobiographical retelling of her pregnancy as a, in her words, a butch bull dyke. And, the interesting ways that people began to treat her or looked at her that she wasn't used to. I mean, she was really, embracing something that is inherently feminine, that was not part of how she had gone through life and how she saw herself. So doing something that's very much for people who can become pregnant and have children that way, it was very out of her comfort zone and very strange and surreal for her. This book is hilarious. It's funny. It's got a lot of really great moments in it. It's something I would recommend for men, women, people who can or cannot have babies. It does not matter. I think you'll all find something very enjoyable out of this book. And it's a great, it's great to see perspectives from different people. If you're tired of seeing, all those happy pregnant woman movies, where everything's great and funny and, kind of romantic and giggly, this is not one of those. She really gets very serious as to, how unfun it is to be pregnant sometimes, and the craziness that can come from that, especially, being a member of the LGBT community, and what that meant. And some of the attitudes and perspectives, the people who do not seemingly either approve or treat her in the way that she expected to be treated, do come from within the LGBT community. So she was surprised, I think, by some of the reactions when she became pregnant. So I do recommend it. It's called Pregnant Butch by A.K. Summers. And
who's the publisher on that?
It's actually published by, I guess it's a very independent imprint called Soft Skull Press. Counterpoint is the publishing house.
The main reason why I ask that is because sometimes it's easier, and I just like to see people if it is a small publisher, people buy it directly from a publisher than
Definitely.
through Amazon channels. So that's why I always, if we do talk about a small press book, then we get the name of the publishing house out there. Okay, Caleb, how about you? What's your wolf of the week?
Well, first I want to send a little bitty baby wolf out to Bryan, just because we miss him, and I hope he's having a good night. Love the guy, and sad he can't be with us, but he sent us a message saying he was having internet outage problems, and so I feel for him. So he deserves a little woof to make him feel better. But no, my wolf of the week actually is a comic. It is published by Image, so not a baby press, but throw it out there anyway. Written by Paulo Barron and drawn by Ernesto Carbonetti. The book is called Paul is Dead When the Beatles Lost McCartney. This is kind of a speculative fiction book, a historical fiction book. It's set in 1966 London while they were at the Abbey Road Studios recording Sgt. Pepper, and Paul McCartney dies in a car wreck, and John Lennon lives. And it's essentially, I saved it for my wolf of the week because I haven't read it yet, but I cannot wait to, because I've been waiting on this book to come out. And it kind of changes the scope of what we think of the Beatles and the dynamic of what would happen if Paul had been the one taken out of the picture. The art is absolutely stunning. I'm rarely at a loss for words on how to describe it, but I really don't know how. It's a mix of pop art. It's a mix of photorealism. It really is multimedia. It blends different genres of art. There's a little bit of Jim Mahfood in here even. And so it's just truly, truly stunning work. So if you like music history, if you like speculative historical fiction, a different take on the world, if you're a Beatles fan and you're a comics fan, this is at that intersection, and it should find its way into your shopping cart.
Okay. I think in terms of the Beatles treatments in graphic novel form, we've been very lucky, and that most of them have been pretty interesting. My wolf of the week, though, is music-oriented. 12 days ago, it was my birthday, and I'm still receiving gifts. And my best friend, Stu Scheinman, got me a copy of the fairly rare, because it was only issued through U2's fan club, vinyl 2-disc set on 10-inch, which is called U2, Another Time, Another Place, live at the Marquee London 1980. It has most of a concert from September 29th, 1980 in London, which at this point, their debut album Boy was still about 3 weeks away from being released. If you are unfamiliar with early U2, there's a lot more post-punk influences, like things along the lines of Susie and the Banshee and the Skids. So it's not exactly the same band that you see from War onward, especially for a band at this point. None of them had hit 20 years old at this point. Just a remarkably focused group. I love early U2, and I love that I have this. It's out there for download as well, but sometimes having the aesthetic of a vinyl copy in your hand is really cool. So that's my wolf of the week. Another Time, Another Place, live at the Marquee, London, 1980 by U2. Okay.
Very cool.
Yes, very cool. And you guys are very cool, and everyone listening is very cool, so it's all very cool. So, again, we are the Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. If you want to write to us, please do so by sending an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. And if you want to listen to us, please download us through iTunes. Please leave a review if you're enjoying what you're hearing. You can catch us on Stitcher Radio and a number of the other podcasting platforms. And again, next week we do plan to be back with you with another live stream. So until then, I'm Bill Zanowitz.
I'm Steve Morey.
And I'm Caleb Alexander McKenzie.
You're going to hear a wolf and an explosion. We'll be back real soon. Take care, everyone.
Wolf!